In the latest 2024 presidential polls, Donald Trump is leading Joe Biden by shocking margins. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at Joe Biden's collapse in the polls, post-debate performance, amidst a lot of talks about him being removed from the ticket, and really answer the question, how did Joe Biden's debate performance affect the polls, and how will it affect the Democratic Party's chances in the general election this November? Welcome back to another video, Purple Political Talk here. Today is Tuesday, July 9th, 2024, and today we're going to be taking a look at the latest 2024 presidential election polls and take a look at the polling and really analyze all that's been going on with Joe Biden and a lot of the weaknesses the Democratic Party currently has. But before we do get started with the video, I want to remind you to like, subscribe, and to turn on the notification bell so you're up to date with all of our unbiased 2024 election content. Now, without a further ado, let's get started with the video. So, as you can see kind of in the thumbnail, one of the biggest trends over the last week is as we've been getting the actual post-debate polls coming out, Joe Biden's numbers nationally in a lot of important swing states have collapsed. And I mean, I wouldn't say it's collapsed to the point where it's completely undoable, where I think, to a certain degree, the Democrats are not completely done. And I think, if anything, we've learned from United States politics over the last couple of years is that, no lead in the polls is going to keep you safe. Even though if you're leading by a great amount, things definitely can change. But what I will say is that when we're considering a pretty close election, with the polling consistently almost tied at the national level, and mind you, that still was sort of a bad sign for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party because, again, because of how, the Electoral College works, the popular vote, you tend to have, just in general, always, more Democrats should be leading in the national vote, but some of this hasn't really translated to a lot of the I guess that tightness to a certain degree translated to some state polls, but still, I mean, having it tied, I think is not the best scenario for the Democrats. But now Donald Trump has expanded his lead by a lot, the days following the debate. And I guess the big news here is the debate, now that we're actually getting polls from the debate, has had really bad impacts for the Democratic Party and the Joe Biden campaign. And I think it's interesting because right now we're seeing a lot of conversations in the mainstream media, and a lot of members of the Democratic caucus, talking about, should Joe Biden be replaced as the nominee? And if so, what are the impacts that this has on the race for the White House, of course, but then also on, down-ballot races. And I'm going to share with you the first thing today is, I think what's really interesting about this whole Biden kind of collapsing a little bit in the polls after the debate is, first of all, the first thing is also, okay, the Democratic Party, as they've been going out and doing a lot of the PR to say like, oh, everything's fine, Joe Biden is going to be okay. They've been saying the polls are wrong. They're all these different things, which, I mean, they're entitled to have that opinion. But what I think is interesting is what we've seen at the collapse for the Democrats at the presidential level. In some races, it's gotten slightly closer down ballot, but I think here you're not going to see, if Joe Biden's presidential campaign collapses, and the polls continue to be, in this range where, if things stand like how they stand right now, we're going to take a deep dive of the polls in all the states. He clearly is not going to win the White House. It's like looking not so great for him right now. But down ballot, I don't think the Democrats are experiencing the same collapse. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a bit. But, if we looked at the polls, the days leading up to the debate, you had Trump leading by 1.5 in some polling averages. The polls were a lot tighter, but I think in this race where we've been always within 1 point, half a point, generally speaking, especially recently, this big dip of 3.3 points difference on the polling averages, at least on Real Clear Politics, and if we take a look at FiveThirtyEight's polling averages, 2.1, we're starting to see that gap building that we really haven't seen. at any other point in the election cycle, except back in March. Ever since more polling started coming out, we've seen the election be sort of tight. Now, here's what I think the big issue for the Democratic Party is right now, and I think the polls really back this up. The issue is Joe Biden. I think a lot of voters, are looking at Donald Trump and they're looking at Joe Biden, and you know, they dislike both. I think that's been the news about this election since the beginning. 70 something percent of Americans have consistently said that they rather not have either Biden or Trump. They wanted someone else. And when that does not happen, you start getting into the situation. Now, I think one of the biggest mistakes the Democratic Party made throughout this whole election cycle, and look, I think as things stand right now, I think Biden is staying in the race. I think it's pretty clear based on what he said, all these meetings with the caucus, with the House Democratic Caucus and other leaders. He looks like he's going to stay in. The biggest mistake the Democrats made was hiding this for so many years, hiding Biden's, decay that's had just because he's been getting older. And I think we have to understand that's just a general part of life where, as you get older, you're going to become weaker and all these different things. But, the White House has definitely shielded him from a lot of different things. They've definitely shielded him from the press. And the press hasn't really been critical of him and of his age. And when you're talking about all of this, the Democrats could be avoiding a lot of this electoral nightmare that they have right now if they would have talked about it earlier, if they would have had open primaries. We have to remember, and it was funny because I was reading yesterday the statement that Joe Biden put out, and what it really pretty much said is that, well, the Democratic voters chose me, but we have to remember this primary for the Democrats was not really a competitive primary, and it did not welcome in competition. As a matter of fact, the DNC canceled the debates, and a lot of parties just decided to not even hold a lot of states did not choose to hold primaries in the first place. So, I think that's a big mistake Democrats made, at least at the presidential level. Now, I think that Joe Biden's biggest issue right now is, of course, look at just the most recent polls. You have two polls that were taken on 6/28. So if I'm not wrong, that was the day right after the debate. You had a Biden +1, a Biden +2. But every single other poll ever since, national polling, you have, Donald Trump ahead by 3 points, by 4 points, which is an issue. And let's take a look at the key battleground states. In Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, so in Nevada, these were states that, we're leaning towards Trump, maybe by 2 points, 3 points, 4 points in most polls. Now the polling average does have them at plus 5.2. Even in the state of Pennsylvania, which I think right now is a state that Democrats are actually in risk of losing. I think out of all the three, right now, there's a slight lead for Trump in Michigan and a slight lead in the state of Wisconsin. Although 2.2 points, you're starting to get into like a lean type lead. But, I think that if you look at how these, polling averages have changed, because just a couple of weeks ago before the debate, I think if my brain is not, if I'm not being mistaken, Michigan was, I think, slightly lead for Biden. Pennsylvania and Wisconsin were definitely a lot closer. It wasn't plus 5.3 for Trump, right? So as the race has shifted in this, after Joe Biden's, performance in the debate. And I think, you've also had a bit of uncertainty amongst the Democratic Party, which is not good. I think if you have uncertainty around your candidate and, when you're starting to get into the part of the campaign season where you have to be out there, you have to be, shaking people's hands, kissing babies and holding your rallies. And that's going to be a challenge for Joe Biden. I think ultimately, what the Democrats have decided is that they're going to run a surrogate campaign. And I'm going to tell you why I think one of the other reasons the Democrats are not so worried. Take a look at this. After the debate, a collapse in some sorts. I guess the word collapse is a little strong, but if you take a look, in the scope of the election, it's definitely a significant change. But if you look at generic congressional ballot, even since the debate, it's been pretty even. And I think that shows one of one of the things that's probably going to happen. And I think I talked about this in one of my earlier videos in the election cycle, where you're probably going to end up seeing a lot of voters who, at the top of the ticket will not vote for Joe Biden, but down ballot will end up voting for their, respective Democrats in the races. And, you can look at a lot of different races. If you take a look at the United States Senate races in the state of Wisconsin, for example, let's see. Here you go. Baldwin plus 12, Baldwin plus 5. So you're talking about, if we went here, Wisconsin current polling average is 2.2 plus for Trump. You're talking almost a 14-point difference between the Democrats down ballot in the race and Joe Biden. And these are some of the same polls that we're talking about here. In the state of Pennsylvania, for example, this poll was, I think, right after the debate, plus 4. So that's a 9-point difference, right? So, down ballot, I think Democrats might be able to hold on. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that I think the Democrats are kind of, not freaking out too much. Like, they're not freaking out too much about Biden, where I think, Biden's chances right now of the presidency are really bad. But I don't think this is a phenomenon where, down ballot, you're going to see, a really, really bad election cycle for the Democrats as a result of Joe Biden's issues. Now, something interesting that we've been getting polling on, following the debate performed by this poll in by Emerson College, we did get a very interesting poll from registered voters, so not likely voters, but registered voters, putting Donald Trump up against different potential replacement candidates. Now, keep in mind with all of this that it is important to note that since some of these candidates necessarily don't have as much name recognition per se, like if you follow politics, you definitely know who these candidates are, or like these people are. But, for the general person taking this poll, they might not really know. So take that with a grain of salt. But here's the biggest thing. So they say they're even if you take out all the independent people running, but in a race with all the third-party candidates in the race, Trump leads the poll by 4. And this was taken July 7th through July 8th. Now, amongst every other candidate in the race, you see Donald Trump, beating them still. And I think, a lot of Democrats have been saying, well, Joe Biden is the strongest candidate. And I think to a certain extent, maybe that's true because of the name recognition right now. Now, if you start running a presidential campaign, I think that it changes completely. And I'm going to make a video about that probably tomorrow, talking about, the potential replacements for Joe Biden and how will that change the presidential race. I think if anything we can see from this is it's going to be interesting if that ends up being the case. But, I think the biggest issue that like the Democrats really face is not a platform issue. I think as far as platform goes, like they have, especially in a lot of those swing counties, they have some platform items they can kind of talk about and kind of follow the 2022 strategy. I mean, the Democrats didn't lose in 2022 by a landslide because of a lot of the same effects that I think we're going to be seeing down ballot. And I think it's a lot of the same reasons why, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, you're seeing down ballot Democrats perform so well. Now, at the top of the ticket, I think that's really up for debate. But I think overall, one of the most interesting parts of this election cycle has been just how unpredictable it's been, right? And, with this now added into the mix of things, right now, and I talked about this yesterday in my video about the 538 forecast, Donald Trump's pathway to the presidency is widening up. There's more opportunities for him to go in and win the presidency with at this point. And again, things can change. We still have a lot of things to see. We have to see more things about his criminal cases. We have other campaign things to see. But and I think honestly at this point in time, Joe Biden is probably going to just deteriorate more as he has to go out and campaign more. Joe Biden's possibilities to win the White House are getting slimmer and slimmer. At this point, the Sun Belt would have been nice for Joe Biden. Winning one or two of those states in the Sun Belt to add, better pathways and not rely just on Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. But at this point, it's really, if Donald Trump can win one, he just needs one, because he's winning in Nevada right now. He's winning in Arizona. He's winning in Georgia. If he can win just one of Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania, he has the White House. So, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And I think what these polls really show is the Democratic Party has a Joe Biden issue, not so much a down ballot issue. And I think the Republican Party should also take advantage of this and to realize they need some help down ballot. I think, luckily for the Republicans, the Senate map is not too bad for them. So even if I think they lose any of the quote unquote competitive races, I think they reach the 50 seats, right? And if Trump wins the White House, then that gives them the Senate. And as far as the House goes, it's really tight right now. So really, any marginal difference might make an impact, but the Democrats have a Joe Biden problem. That's really, and I think one of the other things that is also more interesting about all of this, even what I mentioned before, I've enjoyed seeing Donald Trump kind of take the backseat as all of this conundrum is going on within the Democratic Party with, should we kick him off the ticket? Should he step off? All these discussions. I think in a way that's making Donald Trump a bit stronger, because it's kind of this kind of time-old, war thing where if you're seeing your opponent make a mistake, why stop them in the process? And I think the Democrats are making a mistake keeping Joe Biden on the ticket. I think they're throwing away the candidacy at this point. But yeah, I mean, the Republican Party has capitalized this, I think, in a very smart way, very different from what Donald Trump usually would do. But I think politically, it's very smart. Now, yeah, like down ballot, we are going to have to see what the Republicans can come up with, because I think that's where they're going to struggle a bit more. But, that was a little bit of my thoughts on the current polling. I think the trends that we're seeing are kind of, it's what it is. I mean, the Republicans have gained a lot of support, but more than anything, Biden has collapsed in a lot of swing states. But down ballot, the picture is not that different for the Democratic Party. But I want to know what you think down in the comments. Do you think that Joe Biden should be off the ticket? Do you think that down ballot Democrats will be affected by Joe Biden's candidacy? What do you think of Donald Trump and his strategy right now? Do you think it's smart for the Republican Party to sort of take the backseat as the Democrats figure everything out? I really want to know what you think down in the comments below. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications bell so you're always up to date with our latest content. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.